Felicitous greetings, fellow fanatics.
Speed. I am speed. Faster than fast, quicker than quick. I am lightning.
Much like his old rival Mario, Sonic has done just about every genre you can imagine. He's done puzzle games, pinball games on 2 occasions, 3 if you count the Game Gear version of Spinball separately, had fully featured pet racing simulations mixed in with the adventure titles, with simplified versions in the advanced games. And of course, what would the King of Speed be without a handful of racing titles under his belt? But just as with the Italian plumber, the Blue Blur is most known for the platformers that started it all. Hello everyone, I'm Adam the Fanatic, also known as Mario Fanatic 15, and welcome to another installment of Sega Month. Today we're going to be looking at the Sonic the Hedgehog trilogy on the Sega Genesis, because how can you have Sega without Sonic the Hedgehog? Few characters are more recognizable— Wait a minute, this is just inappropriate attire for this review. And that's how you get changed with blast processing. As I was saying, few characters are more recognizable in the video game sphere than Sonic the Hedgehog. Mario and Pac-Man are the only two that clearly top him in this regard, though there are a few others that you could make arguments for. Being released 2 years prior to Nintendo's Super Famicom, later known as the Super Nintendo Entertainment System outside of Japan, the Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis as it was known here in the States, faced a number of technical limitations when compared to the SNES. The SNES was capable of higher numbers of sprites, larger sprites, higher screen resolutions, a larger color palette, better audio, and it possessed more RAM than the Genesis. The Genesis did have one hardware advantage. Its processor speed was nearly 3 times as fast as that of the Super Nintendo. As I've mentioned before on this channel, this allowed for fast-paced games. But more than that, it also allowed them to capitalize on this difference with a brilliant marketing campaign where Sega pushed the phrase blast processing in an attempt to make Nintendo titles look slow and tedious in comparison. But Sega needed an icon to carry this image. Up until this point, Alex Kidd had acted as Sega's unofficial mascot for their consoles. Speedy and nimble, he was not. So Sega created a new game specifically to rebrand themselves, made from the ground up for the express purpose of being their new mascot. This idea went through several revisions, beginning with a rabbit. At one point it seemed like an armadillo was a strong contender, and eventually settling on a hedgehog named Mr. Needlemouse. But soon the designers realized they didn't just want his design and gameplay to be passed, they wanted it represented in even his name. And thus was born Sonic the Hedgehog. There were 3 main Sonic games released for the Sega Genesis, simply called Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and Sonic the Hedgehog 3. There was also Sonic & Knuckles, but I'll get to that when talking about Sonic the Hedgehog 3. I'll be playing through the titles on the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis Classics Collection, an official emulator available on Steam. Please keep in mind that I will not be giving spoiler warnings for these games, as they are so light on plot. Surely you wouldn't demand I mark Bowser Kidnaps Peach and Mario Rescues the Princess as spoilers in a Mario title. Also, as a disclaimer, I have reached the true endings of these games on a Sega Genesis before, but I did use save states for the special stages in Sonic 1 and 2 this time around. Released in June of 1991, Sonic the Hedgehog came onto the scene with its fast-paced platforming, momentum-driven stages, and colorful designs. The game had Sonic running and jumping through a total of 6 zones, each zone being a set of themed stages consisting of 3 acts, the last of which contains a boss fight against the infamous Dr. Ivo Robotnik, the Eggman. Eggman has captured numerous animals and is using them to power his army of robots. Whenever you attack an enemy, you'll see an animal hop or fly away to freedom. At the end of each zone, you'll free a group of little animal friends before they can suffer a similar fate. Along the way, you'll be able to collect rings. If you're attacked and have at least 1 ring, you'll lose your rings, but survive. If you have no rings when you take a hit, you'll lose a life and get bounced back to the last checkpoint you activated. You also have these item boxes which can contain a few different items to help you, including extra rings, speed booster, temporary invincibility, and these shields which will protect your rings, or your life, from a single hit of damage. If you manage to reach the end of a non-boss stage with at least 50 rings, you'll see a giant ring appear at the end. If you jump in, you'll be teleported to one of the game's special stages, and what are we even looking at here? The game's special stages are rather notorious for their, shall we say, surreal presentation. They're constantly spinning, and you're trying to avoid these gold pieces. I repeat, you want to avoid touching the gold spaces. Instead, you want to make your way to the heart of the labyrinth to find the Chaos Emerald hidden within. The physics in these stages always feels odd. Even after decades of playing them, I'm still confounded by them. If you manage to collect all 6 Chaos Emeralds, you'll unlock the game's true ending, and it's really not worth it. Honestly, the differences between the endings are so minor, I do not recommend going out of your way to collect the Chaos Emeralds. Each of the different zones has a unique theme and flavor. Green Hill Zone has the grassland aesthetic, which would be reused under different names, or sometimes even the same name, the first level in many of Sonic's later adventures. It contains a myriad of slopes and loops to get players used to the game's basic mechanics. Next you have Marble Zone, a slower-paced level with many traps to overcome. Pits of lava, fireballs, and falling chandeliers made of spikes wait around every corner, with the enemies being less of a threat than the environment here. After that, Sonic progresses to Spring Yard Zone, with a great many springs and bumpers to bounce you around every which way. Then we come to Labyrinth Zone. These levels are known for taking the speed-based gameplay and grinding it to a halt, with long underwater segments where you move at a snail's pace, have to wait around to grab these air bubbles so you don't drown, and to top it all off, you don't even get a real boss fight at the end of all this. Eggman just kind of runs away through a tunnel of traps when you catch up to him. Then you have Starlight Zone, which goes back to the fast-paced action that Green Hill was known for, and also tones the difficulty back down for a little bit. You get more loops to play with. This acts as a bit of a breather before you get to Scrap Brain Zone. Scrap Brain goes back to the idea that the environment is more deadly than the enemies, with traps galore. You'll have fire and lightning being shot at you, treadmills that will attempt to push you into giant saw blades, rotating platforms you can only stand on for a moment before they drop you into bottomless pits, trapdoors that lock you in with other hazards, and then when it seems like you're about to finish things up, you get dropped into a Labyrinth Zone-like level. To be fair, this level isn't nearly as long as the actual Labyrinth Zone stages, and thus isn't quite as annoying, but of all the stage themes to bring back, why this one? After that, you'll have your final fight with Dr. Robotnik, which starts a tradition of final fights in these games, getting through them with no rings. Luckily, Robotnik's pattern really isn't that difficult to figure out, and if you've made it this far, you're unlikely to be stopped here. With the financial and critical success of Sonic the Hedgehog, it wasn't long before a sequel was in development. Less than a year and a half later, just in time for the 1992 Christmas rush, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 made its way onto the Sega Genesis. Dr. Eggman has once again stolen the Chaos Emeralds, is still capturing cute little animals and using them as a power source for his robotic army. It's furthermore building a massive space station known as the Death Egg. Someone's been watching too many Star Wars movies. And for once it wasn't me, I swear.
Well, don't look at me, pal.
The core gameplay remained mostly unchanged. You still have the same basic premise of how the game works with how the platforming, momentum, rings, and item boxes work. But there were 4 primary changes. Firstly, the game introduced Tails and multiplayer alongside him. Multiplayer could be done cooperatively in the main game, where Tails was normally controlled by an AI, basically copying whatever Sonic does with a short delay. But alternatively, you could plug in a second controller and have another player control him instead. In this title, Tails plays identically to Sonic, though when playing cooperatively, Tails has infinite lives and will simply fly back in if he ever dies. This makes Tails a great way to let a younger player learn to play the game with you. There's also competitive multiplayer, where players will do a gauntlet of races through 3 zones, plus a handful of special stages. These aren't won purely on time, however, as various scoring categories can give the win to a player that finishes second. Secondly, you have the Spin Dash. This would become Sonic's signature move from this point forward, letting players give Sonic a burst of speed from a standing start, and allowing them to better control the momentum-based gameplay where hills, loops, and other similar features were involved. It's a small change, but it had a huge impact on gameplay. Thirdly, the special stages were completely changed. You still enter them in a similar manner, first requiring 50 rings, but instead of going to the stage's end, you now need to only reach a checkpoint in the level, and then hop into the ring of light that appears above it. This will drain you of your rings, but allow you to attempt to claim a Chaos Emerald as before. The stages are radically different this time around. You now have these half-pipe segments where you try to collect rings and avoid bombs by dodging or jumping over them. Collect enough rings, you'll be allowed to enter the next segment of the special stage. Do this 3 times, you'll complete that special stage and collect the Chaos Emerald. You can attempt to get multiple Chaos Emeralds in a single act because of this, theoretically allowing you to get all of them within the first zone of the game. However, there are some problems with the special stages. Because of the pseudo 3D layout of the game, you'll often be unable to see what's coming when the track ends. This means that it's nigh impossible to win most of the later stages without playing them through a few times to memorize them. Furthermore, if you're playing the game with Sonic and Tails both, you have to collect even more rings to advance. Which is understandable if both players know what they're doing and are well coordinated, but how often are a pair of players going to both be well versed enough in the game to work together like that? The whole point of Tails is to allow a less experienced player to tag along after all. Regardless, there are no longer 6, but 7 Chaos Emeralds to collect. Acquiring all of them does more than just change a bit of the ending this time. Which brings us to the final change, and while not the biggest, it's arguably the most fun. Super Sonic. If you manage to collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds and collect 50 rings, the next time you jump into the air, Sonic will transform into Super Sonic. This is the part of the review where most people would make a Dragon Ball reference, but I was never really a fan of Dragon Ball, so I'm going to do things a little differently here. While Super Sonic, your rings will drain at the rate of about 1 ring per second, but this also comes with 3 benefits. Until your rings hit 0, Sonic will jump higher, run and accelerate faster, and most importantly of all, he's immune to damage from enemies and stage hazards. However, he's not completely invincible.
In the Avatar state, you are at your most powerful. But you're also at your most vulnerable.
You see, Super Sonic can still be killed by either getting crushed or falling into a bottomless pit. And with Sonic's increased speed and acceleration, falling into those pits is easier than ever. And you don't really get an option of when to activate it. If you have enough rings, you will transform into Super Sonic the next time you jump. And there's no way to deactivate it short of running out of rings or dying.
I'm not saying the Avatar state doesn't have incredible and helpful power.
Nevertheless, if you manage to reach a boss fight as Super Sonic with more than a handful of rings left, you'll find that the boss battle becomes quite trivial. And of course, with a new game comes a host of new levels and set pieces. Most zones only have 2 acts this time around, but there's more of them, and levels tend to be a bit longer than in the first game, so there's certainly no shortage of gameplay here. Firstly, you have Emerald Hill Zone, which is Green Hill with a new coat of paint. Next is Chemical Plant Zone, which ups the difficulty with a number of traps and a short water segment. After that, you head to Aquatic Ruin Zone. If you know your way around the various paths, you can actually avoid most, if not all, of the water in this section. Even when you are underwater, the gameplay isn't as slow as Labyrinth Zone was. Then you'll head on to Casino Night Zone, which familiarized players with 2 concepts that would go on to become staples of the series: pinball and slot machines. The slot machines would allow you to gain extra rings, or potentially lose them, although unlike real slots, this is quite rare. Next we come to Hilltop Zone, which brings back some verdant green along with lava-filled caves and seesaws to catapult you high into the air. After that, you'll head on to Mystic Cave Zone, where you'll have to do some light puzzle solving as pulleys and switches are required to get you from place to place. There's also an infamous spiked pit in this level that's impossible to escape from, even as Super Sonic. If you fall in while Super Sonic, you'll need to wait for your rings to exhaust so it can kill you. Why not just make this a bottomless pit instead? Regardless, after that you'll head to Oil Ocean. The ocean is so thick here that you'll only slowly sink into it and be able to jump out. You'll be in the home stretch at this point as you head into Metropolis Zone. A lot of this feels like Scrap Brain, only this time around the enemies are just as much of a threat as the obstacles. This is also the only zone in the game with 3 acts. After that, you head to Sky Chase Zone, a single act where you'll be wing walking and simply fighting a horde of enemies attempting to stop you from reaching Sky Fortress Zone. Again, a single act which serves as the final platforming level of the game, with bottomless pits galore at the beginning of the stage and some pretty tricky platforming. Finally, you'll have the Death Egg Zone, and as mentioned in Sonic 1, you still have no rings for this level, which consists of 2 fights. Firstly, a battle against the first of Sonic's many copies, Silver Sonic, which is not the same as Metal or Mecha Sonic. I know, confusing. This fight isn't too bad, but with how many times you're likely to die to the next boss, you're very likely to learn to speedrun this battle. After this, Robotnik jumps into a giant mech, and can you say difficulty spike? Or maybe it's difficulty because of spiked fists. Either way, this boss is a major jump and challenge compared to any of those that came before it. I can appreciate an increase in difficulty, but this just felt like too much in one moment. The timing for hitting him by jumping is very precise, but can be learned with enough practice. Once you defeat him, the Death Egg crashes to the planet below. Don't worry, it's not nearly as big as the actual Death Star. Then we come to the big one, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles. While in development, Sonic Team realized they'd bitten off more than they could chew. Due to the technical limitations of the time, the game they were making simply could not fit onto a single cartridge. So instead, they released two. First came Sonic the Hedgehog 3 in February of 1994. Solid game in its own right. And then they released Sonic & Knuckles in October of the same year. Sonic & Knuckles was quite unique. Though expansion packs had often been made for PC games, to see one for a console title was unheard of. They managed this by making it so that Sonic & Knuckles could take another game on top of itself. This was primarily meant for Sonic the Hedgehog 3, so you could connect the carts and play the game as a complete experience, known as Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles. However, you also had the option of locking onto Sonic the Hedgehog 2 to play as Knuckles in that game. This brought nothing particularly new to the title, though Knuckles does play a little differently from Sonic and Tails, as we'll discuss in a moment. Furthermore, you could lock onto just about any other Genesis title to play Blue Spear, which I'll explain when I get to the special stages. Much as with 2, the core gameplay of Sonic 3 remained the same as its predecessors. However, unlike Sonic 2, each character is now unique. Tails is capable of flying or swimming short distances by rapidly pressing the jump button. This can even be used in cooperative multiplayer, and if Sonic jumps up to him, Tails can give the Blue Blur a short airlift. Knuckles serves as the game's heart though. He can't jump quite as high as Sonic or Tails, but he is able to glide across long distances and can also climb up vertical walls. He's also capable of using his strength to simply break through barriers before him. This unlocks paths that are unique to Knuckles, and on occasion even makes some levels entirely different for him. There's also a few parts of the game where Knuckles fights different bosses. Then of course, we have the star of the show, Sonic himself. In addition to bringing back his abilities from Sonic 2, he now has the Instant Shield. By hitting the jump button a second time in the air, Sonic creates a brief shield of wind around him, making him invincible for a split second. This can be used to attack enemies that are otherwise protected by spikes or other weapons. Additionally, when Sonic gets a shield, he can now use different extra moves with them. Yes, shields return from previous games, and now they can deflect weak projectiles without breaking. And on top of that, they're divided into 3 different kinds with unique properties. Firstly, you have the water shield. It's the only shield that won't disappear when you jump into the water, and it also allows you to stay underwater indefinitely without drowning. When playing as Sonic, it also gives you a bounce attack which shoots you rapidly downwards, then bounces you back up after hitting the ground or an enemy. Next we have the Fire Shield, which, as you may have already guessed, makes you invulnerable to fire attacks. This makes certain bosses a complete joke. As Sonic, you can do a mid-air dash attack with the shield. And finally, we have my personal favorite, the Lightning Shield. While there aren't many lightning-based hazards for it to make you immune to, it attracts nearby rings for easy collection. Beyond that, when playing as Sonic, the shield gives you a double jump. In addition to special stages, there are now 3 bonus stages. These trigger whenever you pass a checkpoint with a certain amount of rings. They don't give Chaos Emeralds, we'll get to those in a moment, but they do give you a chance to get extra rings, 1-ups, and shields to help you along your way. This includes a giant gachapon that looks like a gumball machine, these electric spears that you circle around as you try to rapidly climb them, and finally, another slot machine. Wait a minute, does Sonic have a gambling problem?
I lost everything.
Whenever you gamble, my friend, eventually you lose.
Special stages are once again completely reimagined. Instead of needing to collect a certain number of rings and reach a point in the level, you now simply need to find these giant rings. They're often hidden behind breakable and fake walls, or otherwise difficult to reach locations, but as long as you can get to them, you can attempt a special stage. This time around, you're trying to change all these blue spheres into red spheres without touching any of the red ones. If you're successful, you'll claim a Chaos Emerald. You can also turn groups of them into rings by making a loop of red around the loop. If you manage to collect all the rings in the special stage, you'll get a huge point bonus, though aside from being good for earning continues and extra lives, this really doesn't mean much. If playing Sonic 3 or Sonic & Knuckles without the other, you'll simply collect Chaos Emeralds as usual. If you connect them, however, things get more interesting. After the Sonic 3 half of the game, if you've already collected all of the Chaos Emeralds, you'll find that giant rings will now teleport you to the Master Emerald Sanctuary, wherein the Chaos Emeralds can be empowered and remade into the Super Emeralds. The process here is very much the same. Complete 7 special stages, each one activates 1 Super Emerald. If you really enjoy these stages, you can unlock millions, and I literally mean hundreds of millions of these stages by locking anything other than Sonic 2 or 3 onto Sonic & Knuckles. Sonic 1 will start you at the first level, whereas other games will start you elsewhere. As before, if you collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds, you'll be able to transform into Super Sonic or Super Knuckles. These behave pretty much the same as Super Sonic did in Sonic 2. However, now they don't automatically activate when jumping. You have to press the jump button a second time in mid-air. This gives you a bit more control over it rather than activating it as soon as possible, allowing you to stockpile rings, save it for a boss, or even just avoid it altogether if you feel it makes things too easy. However, if you manage to collect all the Super Emeralds, things get even better. Sonic and Knuckles can become Hypersonic and Hyper Knuckles respectively, while Tails transforms into Super Tails. Each of these has the standard Super Form bonuses, in addition to an ability unique to each character. Hypersonic can jump in mid-air to create a flash that destroys all non-boss enemies on screen. Hyper Knuckles creates earthquakes when gliding into a wall that similarly destroys enemies. And Super Tails is arguably the best of the bunch, as he gets a handful of flickies that share his power and automatically seek out and attack enemies. What's a flicky, you ask? They're birds from one of Sega's arcade games in the 80s. They actually make frequent cameos in the Sonic series by appearing among the animals that Sonic rescues from Eggman. Sonic 3 has a completely new competitive mode, which is forgettable at best. You have 5 tracks that players can race around on, trying to complete 5 laps in the shortest time possible. Honestly, I recommend skipping this entirely. If you want to compete with your friends in Sonic, play Sonic the Hedgehog 2 or Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. The story for Sonic 3 takes place right where Sonic 2 left off. The Death Egg has crashed to the surface of the planet below, striking a floating landmass known as Angel Island and forcing it to crash into the ocean. Robotnik convinces Knuckles the Echidna, the guardian of the island and of the Master Emerald, that Sonic has come to steal the Master Emerald. It certainly doesn't look good for the Blue Blur when he shows up with the Chaos Emeralds in hand. While Sonic and Knuckles are busy fighting each other, Robotnik is attempting to repair the Death Egg and ready it to launch once more. This time around, you once again only have 2 acts per zone. But just as Sonic 2 had longer acts than Sonic 1, Sonic 3 once again ups the ante, giving relatively huge levels when you compare them to their former counterparts. Beyond that, each act now has its own unique music. Granted, Act 2 is generally just a remixed version of Act 1, but even so, there's a lot of work that went into making each level just truly unique here. You start the game in Angel Island Zone. This begins by seeming like your typical grassy plain starting zone, but soon after, Eggman's robot set the area ablaze, forcing you to give chase and put out the fire. After that, you'll be dropped into Hydrocity Zone, or is that supposed to be Hydro City? The debate will forever rage on. Though you are forced to do a number of underwater segments here, I feel they worked out all the problems such had in earlier games. You still get that feeling of speed and momentum. Beyond that, if you approach the surface of the water at full speed, you can run right over it now. Then we come to Marble Garden Zone. This is another trap-heavy stage with tons of spikes and pillars that will crush you, as well as enemies disguised as spikes. After that, we have Carnival Night Zone, home to a myriad of bumpers and balloons that will bounce you every which way. It's also the abode of the infamous Barrel of Doom, which forced many a child to give up on the game since it's never properly explained in the manual. Just press up and down on the D-pad when standing on top of it to control its movement. From there, you'll move on to the Ice Cap Zone. You'll have slippery surfaces, more traps to contend with, and depending on the path you take, potentially bottomless pits of icy waters. Survive there, and you'll come to the final part of the Sonic 3 portion of the game, Launch Bait Zone. Dr. Eggman has finished repairs to the Death Egg and is preparing to bring it back into orbit. Enemies and hazards alike take a step up here, but manage to get to the end of it all and you'll face a mini boss rush of 2 or 3 bouts against the Mad Doctor. If playing without Sonic and Knuckles, Eggman will fight you with a third robot to give you a proper final boss fight for the game. Though if playing with the games locked on, you'll still be able to fight this boss as Knuckles. Of course, if you are locked on, this is only half the game, as you'll now transition to the stages from the Sonic and Knuckles half of the title. You'll start off with Mushroom Hill Zone, which serves as the typical loops and hills to get you used to a new game. After that, you'll take to the sky with Flying Battery Zone, where you'll be avoiding flamethrowers, using magnets to your advantage, and avoiding mines and missiles alike. After that, you'll travel to the blistering ruins of Standoffness Zone. With a faux Egyptian theme, the two acts are rather different, with the first being outdoors and focusing on quicksand, whereas the second act has you inside this massive tomb where you have to keep turning the lights back on to chase away swarms of ghosts that will otherwise attack you. After that, you travel to Lava Reef Zone, and once again, the two acts are quite unique. First has more of what you'd expect from a volcano-themed level, with pools of magma, fireballs, and falling lava. But once you reach the second act, you're going through tunnels of hardened obsidian until you reach the heart of the island, where you can see the Death Egg implanted upon the volcano's crater. Next, you proceed to the Hidden Palace Zone, the shortest level of the game. If you're playing as Sonic or Tails, you'll finally get to battle against Knuckles as he bars your entry into the Shrine of the Master Emerald. However, the fight is interrupted as Dr. Eggman reveals his hand, stealing the emerald while Knuckles is distracted, intent on using it to power the damaged Death Egg. He makes his getaway and the chase is on. Realizing he's been duped, but too exhausted to fight, Knuckles shows Sonic and Tails how to activate the island's teleporters, sending them to the Sky Sanctuary Zone. Here you'll have to bounce around clouds and battle against Mecha Sonic in 3 boss fights, all of which will be familiar if you've played the previous games. And from there, it's a giant leap to reach the Death Egg just in time as it takes off into the atmosphere.
Now witness the firepower of this fully armed and operational battle station.
Unlike Sonic 2, the Death Egg Zone is actually a pair of fully playable levels this time around. The main gimmick here is that you'll have segments of reverse gravity, so there's no shortage of spikes, missiles, electrified floors, or bottomless pits to test you. Eventually you'll make your way to another mech you'll have to fight. It consists of 2 phases, where first you have to attack its fingers while it tries to crush you, and then another where it'll shoot fire and laser blasts at you as you need to take out the casing that it uses to draw power from the Master Emerald. If you've collected all 7 Chaos or Super Emeralds, then at this point you'll be able to go to the true final stage. And thus begins another tradition of Sonic games, final fights where you're supersonic the entire time. In Doomsday Zone, you'll start out with 50 rings and transform into supersonic immediately, flying through an asteroid field as you give chase to the fleeing Robotnik. You'll be able to collect rings before reaching him, and if you're skilled enough with this, you can even collect enough to claim an extra life. It is a little awkward to have the playstyle change like this for the final fight, but it's not especially difficult, and it's pretty cool to see for the first time. Regardless, after a 2-phase fight, you'll reclaim the Master Emerald, return it to Angel Island, and thus, credits roll. Countless platformers have come and gone over the years, and for most of the 80s and 90s, they were often the genre people thought of when video games were mentioned. And to this day, these 3 titles are held up as some of the key examples of that genre. Filled with great boss fights and interesting stage gimmicks, and with a marketing campaign that just zeroed in on 90s boys with laser precision, it's little wonder that Sonic the Hedgehog took off like it did. The series has certainly had its ups and downs since then, but these games have most certainly held up through the ages. Sonic 1 is a little dated. The lack of a spin dash is definitely a mark against it, and the special stages are almost as bad as the reward for completing them all. Still, it started a legacy and holds up well to this day. I give it a solid 7.6 out of 10. Sonic 2 took these concepts and improved upon them, giving us not only one of the greatest sidekicks in video game history, but also giving more refined level design, a bigger game, and special stages which were still pretty bad, but at least the reward was worth it this time. This is a true classic, worthy of an 8.8 out of 10. And then we come to the magnum opus, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles, the game so big it couldn't be contained in a single carton. This took the concepts of the previous games, ironed out the kinks, refined what worked, and gave us one of the greatest platformers ever made. As one of the best games I've had the honor of playing, I rate Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles an enviable 9.8 out of 10. But we're not done here quite yet. As I said, Sonic was made specifically to appeal to boys in the 90s, and as a 90s kid, I was the ideal demographic for this. Beyond that, I've been playing these games for over 25 years. Perhaps I'm blinded by nostalgia. In an effort to remain unbiased, I'm going to get a second opinion on the matter. Please welcome my nephew, Kayden. Welcome, Kayden. How long have you been playing video games?
Forever.
And how old are you?
6.
So you're immune to the nostalgia of the 90s then?
Yes.
Do you enjoy the classic Sonic titles?
Yes.
Which is your favorite of the Sonic Genesis games?
3.
And who's your favorite character to play as in Sonic the Hedgehog 3?
Tails can fly.
And one final question, what is your favorite video game? It does not have to be a Sonic title.
Mario Kart.
Thank you very much for joining us. You've been a great help. So there you have it, both from the generation that grew up with Sonic and the new generation alike. But what about you? What's your favorite Sonic title? Do you still enjoy the classic games? How do you feel about the numerous spin-offs? If you have any questions, remarks, or opposing points of view, leave them in the comments down below, and please remember to like, share, subscribe, and ring that bell. Now, if only I had a way to record Super Mario All-Stars. Thank you again for watching. I have plenty more to share with you if you're interested. You can click up here above my head to subscribe to my channel. You can click over here on my monitor to see the most recent video that I've worked on. Or if you prefer, you can click up here to open this mysterious vault and see what video that the YouTube algorithm has picked just for you.